we established that the first word of Genesis doesn't say what every translation suggests. Now the question changes. Not what the word means. What was already there when God began? Genesis 1:2 gives us 3 terms for what existed before the act of creation. And none of them mean what the translation suggests. The first term is Tohu, va-vohu. Tohu, va-vohu. English translations render it without form and void. It sounds abstract, almost mathematical, like a blank canvas waiting to be filled. But Tohu va-vohu appears elsewhere in the Hebrew scriptures, and never in an abstract sense. In Isaiah 34, it describes a city after total annihilation. Every living thing gone. The land returned to something that predates human habitation. In Jeremiah 4, the prophet has a vision of the world in reverse. The lights extinguished. The order collapsed. The earth returned to what it was before creation organized it. Tohu va-vohu is not a technical term for nothingness. It is the word for a landscape where life cannot take hold. The word for aftermath. The word for what remains when order has been undone. The text is not describing an empty mathematical void. It is describing something that looks like the wreckage of something else.
And then there is the second term. Tehom. Tehom. The deep. The primordial abyss. In the world of comparative linguistics, Tehom is what scholars call a cognate, a word that shares its root with a word in another language. The root it shares is with Tiamat. Tiamat is the chaos dragon of the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, one of the oldest written texts in human history, predating Genesis by centuries. In that story, the universe does not begin with a declaration into emptiness. It begins with a war. The god Marduk defeats Tiamat, the primordial saltwater chaos, and builds the cosmos from her body. The sky from one half, the earth from the other. The authors of Genesis knew this story. The linguistic connection between Tehom and Tiamat is not coincidental. It is a deliberate engagement with the cosmological imagination of the ancient Near East. But here is what makes it significant. In the Babylonian myth, Tiamat is defeated. She is killed. Her body becomes the world. The chaos is destroyed to make room for order. In Genesis, the Tehom is never defeated. It is never destroyed. It is simply organized, pushed back, covered by the waters above and below. The abyss does not disappear when the light is spoken into existence. It is still there, beneath everything God makes. The scholarly consensus on this is unusually clear. The authors of Genesis were writing in a world saturated with Babylonian cosmology. The Enuma Elish was not an obscure text. It was the dominant creation narrative of the ancient Near East. What Genesis does with that narrative is not ignore it. It rewrites it. In the Babylonian version, creation requires violence. The chaos must be killed before order can exist. The universe is built on a corpse. In Genesis, creation requires speech. God speaks. Things come into being. No war, no corpse, no defeated monster. But the chaos is still there, unnamed, uncreated, present. the Tehom beneath the surface of everything God makes. This is what scholars call demythologization, taking the raw material of an older myth and rewriting it to serve a different theological argument. The authors of Genesis were not unaware of Tiamat. They were responding to her, deliberately, carefully, and with one crucial difference. They never killed her. They just stopped talking about her.
If the connection between Tehom and Tiamat is this clear, and it is, why is it not part of how most people read Genesis? The answer is the same answer we found in the first episode: theological pressure. For the early church, the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo was not just a cosmological position. It was a defensive one. Gnostic traditions argued that matter was eternal and corrupted, that the God of Genesis had worked with pre-existing material, and that this explained the existence of evil. To counter that argument, Orthodox theologians needed a God with no prior conditions, no chaos to organize, no abyss that predated him. A God who created from nothing, and therefore owed nothing to what came before. A God with a Tehom beneath his creation was a God with a limit. And a God with a limit was a God the Gnostics could use. So the connection to Tiamat was not discussed. The Tehom was not explained. The chaos beneath the surface of everything was simply left there, unnamed, unacknowledged, present in the text that everyone was reading, and absent from every conversation about what the text meant. This is not a conspiracy. It is something more ordinary and more difficult to confront. A set of questions that the institution decided were more dangerous than useful. What the Hebrew text of Genesis actually offers, beneath the doctrine that was built over it, is something more honest than creation from nothing. It offers creation as an ongoing act, not a single declaration that produced a perfect and stable universe, but a sustained effort against something that never fully yields. The Tehom does not disappear when the light is spoken into existence. It is pushed back, organized, held in place by an order that must be continuously maintained. If that is the image the text was originally offering, then the theological implications run in a different direction than 2,000 years of doctrine suggest. Order is not the natural state of things. It is something built, something that requires effort to sustain against what was there before it. The chaos beneath the surface is not a failure of creation. It is the condition that makes the act of creation meaningful. A God who speaks light into a universe that was already perfect is performing a demonstration. A God who pushes back an abyss that never fully disappears. That God is doing something that looks a great deal more like what we actually experience when we try to build anything worth keeping. The Tehom was there before creation. It is there after. The text does not resolve it. The doctrine built to cover it did not destroy it. What Genesis describes, beneath 2,000 years of theological architecture, is a universe where order is always being made against something that was there first and will be there last. That is not a comfortable image. has to offer.
The next question is yours. If order is something built, not given, not permanent, what does that change about how you see the things you are trying to hold together?
The Tehom was never created and never destroyed. The tradition decided that question was too dangerous to ask openly. Does that change how you read the opening of Genesis? Or does a God who works against permanent chaos feel more real to you than one who simply declared a perfect universe into existence? Leave it in the comments. And if this is the kind of question you want to keep asking, subscribe.